The soup gave its soft second bubble just as my son said, "Dad, don't argue with me. Just get to St. Catherine's. Lucy's asking for you." I had one hand on the blue ceramic mug Eleanor bought at a church sale in '94, and the other on the stove knob, and for one small, stupid second, what caught me was not the fear in his voice, but the smell. Something had already started to scorch. That was the first wrong thing. Not the hospital, not even the panic. The smell of lentil soup turning a shade too dark at the bottom of the pot, because I was standing there in my own kitchen, in my own house, trying to understand why my son sounded frightened and impatient at the same time. "What happened?" I asked. There was a pause. Not a long one. Long enough. "She's sick. They admitted her fast. I'm dealing with intake." "Just come. She keeps asking for Grandpa." "Admitted for what, Dad?" He breathed my name the way people do when they want to turn your questions into your flaw. Then he said, "Please, just come." I shut the burner off too late. The pot kept giving off that thin, burnt smell under the cumin and onion. The east window over the sink still had the last grey of afternoon hanging in it. Rain from earlier had left the hydrangea branches black and slick against the fence. My coat was on the peg by the mudroom door. My keys were in the blue crock beside the pantry where they had lived for so long my hand could find them in the dark. That was the life I had now. Measured motions, familiar surfaces, the kind of house where a widower can keep going by letting his hands remember what his heart still resents. Which entrance I asked, already reaching for my coat. "Front pediatric desk. I'll meet you there." The line clicked before I could ask anything else. I stood still just long enough to hear the refrigerator hum and the clock over the stove tick and the slow, settling sound the old house made when outside air cooled faster than the wood inside it. I took the pot off the burner and slid it back. Lentil soup, for one. Half a loaf on the counter. Butter softening in the dish. My dinner had been simple enough that Eleanor would have called it sad but serviceable, and I heard her voice so clearly in that kitchen that it hit me in the chest harder than Evan's call had. "Don't leave a burner warm if you're rushing, Danny. Panic makes fools of decent men." Eleanor had said that once during Lucy's first winter when Claire had phoned in tears because the baby's fever hit 103, and nobody could find the Tylenol. Eleanor, who could sort a crisis by height and temperature and drawer location before most people had even decided whether to cry, had pushed the pot off. The heat snapped the lid onto the flour tin, grabbed her purse, and told me panic was only useful if it could drive. That memory changed the room around me. A second earlier, I had been an old man in his kitchen trying to get to a hospital. Then I was a husband again briefly with my wife's voice in the walls and her competence moving through the house faster than fear. I took my coat, shoved my wallet into the inside pocket, grabbed the keys from the crock and headed for the mud room. The side door stuck a little in wet weather. Eleanor always said it didn't stick. It just required respect. You had to lift the handle a hair before turning it, otherwise the old frame sulked and held you there. I did it by muscle memory and was halfway outside before I remembered I hadn't turned off the kitchen light. I nearly went back in, nearly. But it was Lucy. 7 years old, thin wrists, brown hair like Claire's had been. She still slipped her hand into mine when we crossed parking lots, though she was getting close to the age when children stop doing things like that in public without noticing. She had her mother's habit of asking questions in sets of 3, and Eleanor's way of folding napkins too neatly for a child. If she'd asked for me, I wasn't going to stand in the mudroom worrying about bulbs. I pulled the side door closed behind me, heard the latch catch, and hurried to the truck through the damp smell of spring earth and wet cedar mulch. Marlene Beauchamp's porch lamp glowed next door behind lace curtains. Her late husband used to change that bulb every Thanksgiving whether it needed it or not. Now, Marlene did it herself with a step stool and a face that dared the world to call her old. I saw the light, but not her. By the time I got to the end of Maple Crest Drive, my hands were tight on the wheel. St. Catherine's was 15 minutes away if the lights were kind, and nobody in front of you believed in braking from a distance. I drove faster than I usually did and slower than my fear wanted. That's one of the humiliations of age nobody warns you about. You do not stop caring urgently. You just begin having to measure urgency against what your body and your judgment can still afford. Rainwater shone black under the street lamps. The radio stayed off. Evan called twice while I was driving, both times long enough to let me hear breathing and hallway noise before the line cut. He didn't answer when I called back the second time. That sat wrong with me. Not wrong enough to name, wrong enough to travel with. By the time I pulled into the hospital garage, the sky had gone from wet gray to that deep slate color spring evenings get before the dark settles all the way. Street. Catherine's had its usual look from the outside: too much glass, too much white light, too many stories rising up like they thought architecture could shame pain into good behavior. I parked on the second level, forgot where, walked too fast to the elevator, then had to stop halfway across the lobby because my knee reminded me it still belonged to the weather. The pediatric desk was just beyond the main corridor under a cheerful wall mural full of painted kites and clouds. I remember that because the mural made me angry at once. Not with any logic. Just one of those low, private angers that come when a place is trying too hard to look kind. A young woman in navy scrubs sat behind the desk, typing. A man with a little boy on his hip was asking for visiting hours. Somewhere farther down the corridor, a machine beeped 3 times in a row, stopped, then began again. The floor smelled like lemon cleaner and overworked air conditioning. I walked up and said, "My granddaughter was admitted. Lucy Mercer. My son said they brought her through here." The nurse looked at me politely, then down at her screen. "Lucy Mercer. That's right." She typed, stopped, typed again. "Do you know her date of birth, sir?" I gave it to her. She checked another screen, then another. I watched her face change in a way that took me straight back to my own mother's kitchen table when I was 12, and had handed her a report card folded small enough to look harmless. Not alarm, not certainty. Just the first tightening of a person realizing the thing in front of them no longer matches the words around it. "There's no pediatric admission under that name," she said. The corridor noise seemed to tip a little when she said it. Not louder, just farther away. "She may have come in under her mother's last name," I said quickly. "Hale. Or maybe through ER first. My son said..." She checked again. No Lucy Hale either. I took a breath. "Try Eleanor." "No, I'm sorry. That's not..." I stopped. My wife's name had jumped in there where it didn't belong, and shame moved through me like a flush. The nurse looked up at me then. Really looked. Not impatient, not yet. "Would you like me to call ER and confirm there wasn't an outpatient intake that hasn't populated the floor system?" "Yes." She picked up the phone, spoke quietly, listened, thanked somebody, then set it down. "Nothing under either name," she said. The man with the little boy had moved away by then. There were people behind me. A volunteer in a pale blue jacket wheeled a cart of books past the hall. Someone laughed too loudly near the elevators. I became abruptly aware of how old I must have looked standing there with my coat still damp from the rain, asking a young nurse to go hunting for a child who apparently did not exist. "My son called me," I said. "He said my granddaughter was here. He said she asked for me." The nurse's expression shifted again, softer now, more careful. "What's your son's name, Evan Mercer?" She checked once more, maybe for his name, maybe just to give me the dignity of trying. Nothing. I took my phone out and called him. Straight to voicemail. Called again. Same. The nurse lowered her voice a little. "Sir, are you certain he said St. Catherine's?" I laughed once, short and ugly enough to embarrass me. "I'm old, not deaf." She held my gaze for a beat. Then she leaned forward just slightly and said very quietly, "Sir, there is no child here under that name." The way she said it made the sentence different from the one before. Not just information now. Warning. I didn't understand the warning yet. I only felt it go cold inside me. She reached toward a stack of visitor stickers, peeled one free and wrote, "Ped's Inquiry" across it with a thick black pen. Then she paused with the pen in her hand and frowned slightly. "This is just so security doesn't stop you wandering around looking," she said. "But I don't think wandering will help." I took the sticker because she handed it to me. It felt slightly warm from her hand. No barcode, no printed unit number, just black marker on white adhesive. I put it on my coat without looking at where. My fingers were clumsy enough that it stuck crooked, then peeled at one corner. Maybe he meant mercy, I said, though I knew he hadn't. Maybe she said. She was being kind. Kind in the way people are kind when they think confusion may be part of the problem. That was the worst part. Not anger, not being challenged, being gently made room for. I stepped aside and called Evan again. This time he answered on the fourth ring with enough background noise to sound plausible and not enough to place. "Dad, I told you I was handling it. I'm standing at pediatric intake." So there is no Lucy Mercer here." Silence. Then, "Did you give them the right name?" I closed my eyes. "Evan, we came through emergency. They move people around. You know how hospitals are. Which room, Dad? I'm in the middle of something." That was when the unease sharpened. Not because he sounded guilty, because he sounded annoyed. There is a tone people get when reality is failing to follow the script they had prepared for it, and I heard the first edge of that in him. "Put Lucy on the phone." Another pause. "She's sleeping." "What's wrong with her?" "It's private." "You called me. I called because she wanted you. Then put her on the phone when she wakes up." "Dad. Jesus." That name again dropped the way people use religion when they need frustration to sound like innocence. Then he said more evenly, "You probably got the wrong desk. Stay there." "I'm coming." The line went dead. I stood in that corridor with the sticker half peeling from my coat and felt all at once not fear exactly, but exposure, as if something private had happened to me in public. I was not accustomed to being handled. Not by hospitals, not by my children, not at my age. Yet there I was, an old man under a painted mural, while a nurse behind the desk tried not to watch me too closely. I could have waited. Maybe a younger man would have, maybe a more trusting one. Instead, after 3 more minutes and no sign of Evan, I went back to the desk and asked, "Where's the nearest men's room?" The nurse pointed down the hall. I walked that way, turned the corner, and stood alone by the vending machines where nobody could see my face. Then I called Claire. She answered on the second ring. "Dad, do you know anything about Lucy being at St. Catherine's number?" "Why Evan called. Said she'd been admitted." A pause. Then very flatly, "Lucy's at Jenna's mother's tonight. School concert practice tomorrow." My grip tightened on the phone. "You sure I saw Jenna at 4:30? "Why?" "Because the floor under me had changed, that's why." But I said, "No reason, because fathers have habits too, and mine had never included making one child help me think the worst of another before I absolutely had to." Claire exhaled. "Dad." "What happened?" "I'll call you back." "Dad." But I had already ended it. When I returned to the desk, the nurse looked at me once and knew enough not to ask. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For being careful." It was all I had. I peeled the visitor sticker off my coat and folded it once before I realized that was foolish and stuck it into my inside pocket instead. The nurse opened her mouth as if she might say something else. Then she didn't. I walked back through the lobby slower than I'd entered it. My knee had stiffened. The evening crowd had thickened. Somewhere near the coffee kiosk, a child was crying in the exhausted, furious way children cry when they have run out of all other options. Outside the glass doors, the parking lot lights looked too bright against the wet pavement. I could feel my pulse in the back of my neck. In the garage, I sat in the truck for a full minute before turning the key. The soup, I thought. It was such an absurd thought I nearly laughed again. My granddaughter was not in the hospital. My son had lied. I did not yet know why, and I was thinking about soup. But that is how shock arrives sometimes when you are no longer young. Not as one grand emotion, as insulted little practicalities. The soup would be ruined. The kitchen light was still on. The side door might not have caught properly because I had pulled it in a hurry. That last thought stayed with me all the way home. By the time I turned onto Maple Crest, the street had settled into that evening quiet older neighborhoods wear so well. Porch lamps, television glow behind curtains, one dog barking somewhere farther down and then stopping as if corrected. Marlene's porch light was still on. My house looked normal. That almost made me angry too. The kitchen light glowed through the side window over the sink exactly where I had left it. The truck in the drive was mine and only mine. The maple by the fence moved a little in the leftover wind. Nothing on the porch, nothing at the mailbox. No dramatic sign of intrusion, no broken glass, no cheap permission for alarm. I parked and sat another moment with the engine off. This was the hour Eleanor and I used to call the settling hour. Dinner on or done. Daylight gone but not forgotten, the house taking stock of itself. She had little names for parts of the day like that, as if naming them politely kept life from becoming one long blur of bills and worry and weather. I got out and went to the side door. The handle gave under my hand more easily than it should have. Not open, just easier. As though whoever last used it had respected the trick of the latch less than the door required. I stood there with my key in the lock, already uneasy, unable to tell if I was feeling something real or merely arriving home altered enough to imagine it. Inside the mudroom smelled faintly of damp wool, old detergent, and the burned edge of lentils. The kitchen was warm. The pot sat where I had shoved it off the burner. One side of the bottom had gone black. Steam no longer rose from it. My blue mug was still on the counter, tea gone cold. The butter dish stood open beside the half-loaf knife laid across the plate, the way Eleanor used to call a marriage hazard, because somebody always ended up reaching blindly and cutting themselves. I stood there and listened. Refrigerator, hum. Clock tick. Floor vent whisper. Nothing else. Evan, I said, though I did not expect an answer. None came. I took the lid off the soup pot, stared down at the darkened ring at the bottom and put the lid back on. Then I crossed to the pantry and dropped my keys back into the blue crock, or tried to. They landed against another key already in there with a sound I felt before I understood. There should have been 3 keys in that crock. My truck key ring, the back door, deadbolt spare, and the old brass side door spare. Eleanor insisted on keeping separate, because if everything's on one ring, nothing's really spare. I looked down. Truck keys, deadbolt, spare. No brass side door key. I frowned, then checked my own ring, as if I might have absent-mindedly taken it with me. I had not. That was another small thing, the kind of thing you can explain 6 ways if you need to. Eleanor might have moved it once. Claire might have borrowed it years ago. I might have set it somewhere stupid after changing the batteries in the mudroom flashlight. But Eleanor had been dead 2 years. Claire never touched my keys, and I did not set practical things in stupid places if I could help it. I turned then and looked at the side door, the utility shelf beside it, the narrow bench under the hooks where coats hung. Wet marks dotted the mat from my shoes. There was another older stain there, too, drying at the edge, shaped less like a footprint than a drag of heel or mud from tread. Nothing dramatic, just enough that I crouched and touched it with 2 fingers. Dirt, not much. Probably mine from rushing out. Probably. The phone rang before I could finish the thought. It was Marlene. I answered with, "Hello." Her voice came careful right away. "Daniel, I hope I'm not overstepping." That sentence changed the room faster than any scream would have. "No," I said. "What is it?" "I saw your truck leave earlier, and then—" She paused. Well, I told myself it might be nothing, and then I told myself, that's how people get talked out of their own eyes. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. "What did you see, Marlene, your son?" Evan, every muscle in my shoulders seemed to narrow. "When, after you left, maybe 10 minutes, not long, I heard paper rustle on her end. I wrote the time down because I was doing my bird notes by the window. Marlene, I know how it sounds." "No. Tell me." "He pulled into your drive, but not all the way. Just enough to leave quick. Used the side door. Went in like he knew you weren't there." I looked toward the mudroom without moving. "He had a key?" I asked. "I don't know. I couldn't see that. But he didn't knock. My mouth had gone dry." "How long was he inside first time?" "Maybe 4 minutes. Then he came out carrying something flat. Wooden, I think, or cedar-colored. About so wide." She must have set her hands apart while saying it. "Then he stood by his car, looked down the street once, put it back, I think, and went inside again." "Put it back?" "I'm not certain." "He came out empty-handed the second time. Something cold moved under my ribs." "You're sure it was Evan?" "Oh, honey." Her voice softened for 1 second, then steadied again. "I've known that boy since his teeth came in crooked. I'm sure." I put one hand over my eyes. "He told me Lucy was in the hospital." Another pause. I could hear her taking that in, fitting it to what she had seen. Then she said quietly, "Daniel, if he was with your granddaughter at the hospital, he wasn't there the whole time." There it was, the private warning. Simple enough to fit into a kitchen, heavy enough to bend one. I looked at the staircase beyond the hallway arch. It rose from the front hall in a turn Eleanor used to decorate with winter garland and spring ribbon and paper leaves Lucy had cut crooked in kindergarten. I had not been upstairs today. Not yesterday either. Maybe not in 4 days, unless you counted standing on the 4th step to change the bulb in the landing sconce and coming right back down before memory got ambitious. "Did anyone else come?" I asked. "No." "Did he look upset?" She took a breath. "Not to me. Focused, maybe a little rushed, but not upset. That hurt in a way I still had no language for." "Thank you," I said. "Would you like me to come over?" "No." "You don't have to be proud with me." "I know, I meant it, which is why I said no again." After we hung up, I stayed at the table and listened to the house. It did not sound different. Houses almost never do when the difference is in you. I looked at the blue crock by the pantry, then at the mudroom, then up toward the hallway and stairs. The rational part of me started assembling excuses at once. Insurance papers. Evan thought I kept them upstairs. Lucy had some school emergency and he panicked. He lied because he knew I'd ask questions and he needed something quickly. He borrowed the brass key months ago and forgot. He entered because he was my son, and sons do not always knock. The flat object could have been anything. All of that came easily. What did not come easily was the feeling in my body. Not fear exactly. Violation. That word arrived and sat down. I got up from the table and walked to the foot of the stairs. The house held still around me. Somewhere inside the walls the heat clicked and settled. I put my hand on the banister. The wood was smooth in the places Eleanor's hand had polished over years of going up with folded laundry and down with outgrown shoes and up again with Christmas boxes and down again with old tax binders. There are parts of a marriage your body remembers more honestly than your mind does. The stair rail was one of ours. I climbed, not quickly or bravely either. Just one stair at a time with the old pressure in my left knee and the old reluctance in my chest. The landing still held the small framed watercolor Lucy made in 1st grade, a blue house with a crooked chimney and a sun too close to the roof. Eleanor had taped it there until we find the right frame, which in Eleanor's language meant forever. The upstairs air smelled the way it always did when I came up too suddenly. Cedar linen, old plaster, the faint dry sweetness of closed rooms. Nothing shouted wrong. That made it worse. The hallway carpet runner lay straight. The master bedroom door was half shut. The linen corridor light was off, but the landing lamp threw enough across the shelves for me to see the folded stacks of guest towels, blankets, and seasonal runners Eleanor used to rotate every November and May, whether anybody needed them or not. I stepped into the corridor and stopped. Most people would not have seen it. That thought came first. Then I saw it because she taught me to. The top row of guest towels on the left shelf had the embroidered edge turned inward. Eleanor never turned them inward. Never. Said if a thing was worth embroidering, it was worth letting face the room. She had said that with a smile, the first year we were married, while showing me where the good towels went, and I had kissed her neck in the hallway and asked whether towels could have self-respect. She said everything in a house had self-respect if you kept it properly. Now 3 of them faced the wall. The shelf beneath them held a folded green quilt for Lucy's sleepovers. Only it had been folded backward, the seam on top instead of tucked under. A tiny thing. A tiny wrong thing. The kind grief lets you ignore unless love trained your eye first. I reached out and touched the towels. They were clean, dry, ordinary. My hand moved from them to the shelf bracket. Bent. Slightly. Not enough to fail. Enough to tell me the stack had been pulled hard and shoved back worse. A smell rose stronger then. Cedar. Not the usual background sweetness of an old linen hall. Freshly moved cedar. Open box cedar. Disturbed cedar. I stood very still and felt that same cold thing from the hospital return, only now it had somewhere to sit. At the far end of the corridor, the hall closet door stood shut. Eleanor kept extra quilts there. Holiday table runners, wrapping paper tubes boxes too flat for attic bins and too useful to throw away. When Lucy was small, Eleanor used to let her hide in that closet while helping, which meant sitting on the floor with a bow in her hair and coming out smelling like cedar and tape. I walked to it and opened the door. Inside, at first glance, everything looked ordinary enough. Shelves, flat boxes, extra pillows, stacked runners. A shallow indentation in the dust where something rectangular had sat for years and now did not sit quite as evenly. Then I saw the spacing. Eleanor arranged by interval. Not by height, not by color, by interval. Enough room above the Christmas runner box for a hand. Enough room above the quilt case for airflow. Enough room beside the cedar pieces so the smell would not overtake the linens. It was one of those private household systems that sound ridiculous until you live beside someone for 42 years and realize order is a language like any other. The second shelf was wrong. Not messy. Wrong. Too tight between the green quilt and the flat cedar storage piece behind it. As if somebody had removed something, then slid it back without understanding the breathing room Eleanor always left around it. I bent and looked closer. The front edge of the shelf showed a faint, fresh scrape in the paint. Brass corner scrape, I thought before I knew why I thought it. My pulse had begun to knock in my neck again. Below the shelf on the closet floor lay one tiny thread of white paper caught near the trim. I picked it up. Adhesive backing, sticker paper. Nothing printed on it, just a peeled corner from somewhere. Maybe from the hospital sticker in my pocket when I shoved the coat against my side. Maybe from years ago. Maybe nothing. I slipped it into my palm anyway. Behind me, the house stayed quiet. Then from downstairs, the old refrigerator compressor kicked on with a sudden hum that made me turn too fast. That was the moment I understood how thin my safety had been all evening. I was standing in my dead wife's linen corridor in the part of the house I had let grief keep for itself, and something in the shelves had been handled by hands that did not know her. My son had lied about a hospital. My neighbor had seen him use the side door. The brass spare key was gone. And the upstairs air smelled like cedar that had been disturbed not by memory but by search. I looked again at the shelf spacing, then at the shallow flat cedar piece tucked farther back behind the quilt stack, almost where it belonged, and not quite. My mouth moved before I had decided to speak. What did she hide from him? The empty landing gave me back nothing, not even an echo, just the stillness of a house that had been holding memory all along and had finally quietly begun to tell the truth. I stayed there another few seconds with my hand on the closet door, staring at the shelf spacing, as if the answer might rise out of it if I looked hard enough. Nothing did. Just the faint cedar smell, the hush of the upstairs, and the old, sick feeling a man gets when the world has not yet changed shape enough to justify what his body already knows. I closed the closet slowly and stepped back into the landing. The watercolor Lucy made in first grade hung crooked in its cheap white frame. I had passed it 100 times without seeing the tilt. Now I saw everything. The dust line on the baseboard, the slight shine where Eleanor's hand had always brushed the rail turning the corner, the lamp cord tucked behind the little walnut table instead of hanging loose. The upstairs had always carried her. That was the thing about a well-kept house after a death. It keeps obeying the dead for a while. Long enough to comfort you if you are tired. Long enough to accuse you if you are honest. I went back downstairs because standing there any longer felt too much like waiting for the house to speak again. The kitchen looked the way kitchens always do after fear has passed through them without permission, ordinary on the surface and somehow embarrassed by it. The burnt edge of the soup had thickened into a smell that would stay in the pot until morning, no matter how hard I scrubbed. My blue mug sat where I had left it. Eleanor's old recipe tin was on the counter, the one with faded strawberries on the lid, though that was not unusual. I had taken it out earlier, looking for her lentil soup card, then ended up making it from memory and getting half the seasoning wrong. I moved around the kitchen because my body needed occupation. I put the butter back in the fridge, covered the bread, turned the soup into the sink and ran water over the pot. The burnt ring clouded and blackened the stream. I watched it longer than I needed to. The side door, the missing key, Marlene's voice, the shelf spacing, each one of those taken by itself could still be made to behave. That is what denial is at my age. Not blindness, housekeeping, keeping each wrong thing folded separately so the pile does not yet look like a burial. I dried my hands and went back to the pantry crock. There were only the 2 keys. I crouched and checked the shelf below the little tray where Eleanor used to keep rubber bands and spare batteries, the catch-all drawer beside the phone nook. Even the top of the refrigerator, because I once set a key there while changing the smoke detector battery and spent half a day accusing the dog of absurd things. Nothing. I was straightening up when headlights swung across the front window. Evan. He came to the front door for once, not the side, and rang instead of using whatever access he had used before. That told me something all by itself. Men reveal their own guilt more often by courtesy than by panic. I stood still in the kitchen and let the bell ring a second time. Then I walked to the front hall and opened the door. He had his rain jacket half-zipped, hair damp at the temple's phone in one hand. He looked tired in a competent way, the way men who want credit for strain always do. "There you are," he said. "I've been trying to call. You answered when I called." "Yeah, and then I was driving. You said you were at the hospital." He exhaled through his nose. "Can I come in?" I stepped back because I was raised properly and because 40 years of fatherhood do not disappear in one wet evening. He walked past me, smelling of rain car heat and the expensive soap Jenna buys at warehouse stores. He glanced automatically toward the kitchen, then toward the staircase. It was quick, so quick I might have missed it an hour earlier. Now I saw it. "What happened?" I asked. He gave me the expression people use when they intend to sound patient with someone being difficult. Jenna panicked. Lucy wasn't admitted. They thought she might need stitches after rehearsal, but it turned out to be minor. I said hospital because I was moving fast. Claire says Lucy's at Jenna's mother's. He blinked once. Now she is. Was she ever at St. Catherine's? He looked past me toward the front window. "Dad, I'm not doing this like I'm on trial." That sentence sat between us longer than he seemed to intend. "I didn't say you were." "No, but you're looking at me like—" He let it trail off. It was confusion. Jenna took her to an urgent care first, then to her mom's because Lucy wanted to stay over there after all the fuss. I was trying to coordinate 3 things at once. He talked fast when he lied as a boy, not stuttering, not looking away. just building. One explanation joined to the next with too much smoothness, like a road patched too many times in the same place. You said she'd been admitted, I said, and I was wrong. You said she was asking for me. She was upset. You told me to meet you at pediatric intake. He rubbed one hand over his mouth, already irritated by the amount of detail reality was demanding from him. I may have said the wrong desk. I don't know. I was in the car. Jenna was crying. Lucy was crying. I thought you'd understand the general idea. The general idea. There it was again, that small managerial way of making precision sound like pettiness. I watched him. He had not taken his jacket off. His phone stayed in his hand. He had positioned himself in the front hall, neither fully in nor ready to sit. And his eyes had already traveled once to the stairs, once to the mudroom, and once so quickly I almost doubted it to the doorway toward the kitchen and pantry. Did you come by here earlier? I asked. He answered too fast. No. Then he corrected. I mean, I pulled in. I thought maybe you'd left your phone. Marlene saw you use the side door. His face did not fall apart. That would have been easier. Instead, it tightened at one corner, a very small loss of composure, like a man dropping one card from a full hand and hoping nobody noticed. I came in to grab the insurance folder, he said, for Lucy in case urgent care asked about coverage. From upstairs, I looked where Mom used to keep the paperwork in the hall closet, then remembered you moved everything downstairs after she got sick. He said it while looking at me. That part was good. Practiced maybe, but good. The trouble was, it was wrong. Eleanor had never kept current insurance paperwork in the upstairs hall closet. She kept guest linens, holiday runners, wrapping supplies, and flat storage. Insurance papers had lived in the kitchen desk until her diagnosis, then in the file crate under the sideboard because she got tired more easily and wanted everything on the first floor. I felt a strange, almost weary relief at that. Not because it was good, because one lie that specific gives a man something to hold. You looked in the wrong place, I said. He shifted. I told you I was moving fast. He made a little show then of finally taking off the jacket, as if settling himself in the house might settle the conversation too. He draped it over the hall chair Eleanor used to forbid coats from touching because rain belongs in the mudroom and nowhere else. The gesture landed wrong on me, more sharply than it should have. Maybe because it was careless. Maybe because it was familiar. Sit down, I said. He frowned slightly. I can't stay long. Sit down anyway. He followed me into the kitchen. The house changed when he entered it like that. Not loudly, nothing theatrical, but the room lost some part of its shape. He stood where Eleanor would have set out plates. He rested his hand on the back of her chair without seeming to know it was hers. He glanced once toward the pantry crock and then away, too carefully. Every ordinary movement acquired a second meaning the longer I watched him. I sat at the table. He stayed standing until I looked up long enough that he understood refusing would itself be an answer. Then he sat across from me. The kitchen light cast the same hard little shine on his cheekbones it used to when he was 16 and inventing reasons for why the car was low on gas. He had become a handsome man in the broad, marketable way some men do, good jacket, good haircut, competent smile, just enough fatigue to suggest importance. Eleanor used to say he had the kind of face the world forgives faster than it should. That memory hurt differently now. Not because she had been right, because I had always laughed when she said it. You could have told me the truth, I said. He spread one hand on the table. I made a messy call under pressure. That's the truth. No, the truth is, you used Lucy's name to get me out of the house. His eyes changed then. He looked at me fully for the first time since coming in. That's ridiculous. Is it? Yes. Marlene watched you come through my side door. He gave the smallest shake of his head as if disappointed in me. Marlene sits in that window all day collecting half of everybody else's life. She wrote the time down. He laughed once, soft and dismissive. That's not helping your point. No, I thought. It is helping yours. Everything becomes less real to a man like you once you can make it sound small. I needed the folder, he said again. I came in. I looked upstairs because I was moving fast and remembered wrong. I left. What flat box did you carry out? His mouth stilled. What, Marlene said you came out with something flat and cedar-colored. I had the insurance folder. Then why'd you go back in empty-handed? He leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling like a man being charged rent for his own exhaustion. Because it was the wrong folder. From upstairs. I just said, I know what you said. He dropped his gaze back to me. There was heat in it now, not much, just enough to expose the strain under his patience. Dad, what exactly are you accusing me of? That question matters more for the tone than the words. Innocent people often ask what is going on. Guilty people ask what exactly you think you know. I did not answer right away. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, tires hissed through wet street. The house held us both and liked neither of us for it. Finally, I said I don't know yet. That was the truest thing in the room. He seemed to hear it as opportunity. Then let me help, he said softer now. You've had a rough night. You got spooked at the hospital. Marlene got into your head. You went upstairs and saw things you haven't looked at in a long time. That's a lot at once. There are moments when concern becomes correction so subtly that if you are lonely enough, you thank the person for it. I had done that before with him. I could feel the old habit reaching for me even then. He went on. Mom's been gone 2 years. Things shift. You move things around and forget. I move things around and forget. That doesn't mean anybody's creeping through the house. Things shift. As he said it, his eyes went to the sideboard. Not the top, the lower drawer. I followed the glance before I could stop myself. And there, tucked half under the stack of mail by the lamp, was an envelope I had not noticed when I came in. I would have sworn it had not been there. It was a utility duplicate white window envelope folded once at the edge where it had caught on something. I reached for it. Evan's attention sharpened. Not a full body movement, just that invisible tightening again. I picked it up and looked at the return address. Buckley Electric Cooperative. Nothing strange about that. They handled half the older homes in our area. We had paid that bill for years. The strange part was the window, not our post office box, not my home address, a private mail center in Brook Hollow, box 417. I turned the envelope over. What is this? Evan didn't answer immediately. It's probably from the development office, he said at last. It's in my house. So, maybe I stuck the wrong envelope down when I came by. When you came by through the side door. His jaw moved once. I slid a finger under the flap and took out the statement. Same account number as my electric bill. Same house address in the service field. Duplicate mailing address, PMB 417, Brook Hollow Pack and Ship. I looked up. That's my electric account. He held my eyes a fraction too long. Then maybe you accidentally signed up for duplicate mail years ago and forgot. It was almost elegant, the nerve of that. I set the paper flat on the table between us. I don't forget utility mail. He shrugged. You forgot Mom moved things all the time upstairs. There it was. Tiny, mean, almost mild enough to miss. My voice came out quieter than his. Your mother did not move things all the time. His face closed at once. Not guilt, irritation at the correction itself. I folded the bill back into the envelope carefully. That was another habit from Eleanor. Handle papers neatly even when they insult you. Where is Lucy now? I asked. At Jenna's mother's. Can I call her? It's late. Can I call my granddaughter? His fingers tightened around his phone. She's probably asleep. I nodded once. Then I stood, took the envelope with me, and walked to the kitchen desk. The old landline still sat there, though mostly it collected messages from pharmacies and political campaigns. Next to it, in the vertical sorter Eleanor bought from an office supply catalog in 2008, were 3 labeled slots in her handwriting: to pay, to file, to ask about. I had never had the heart to replace the cards. Or maybe not the heart. Maybe the laziness of grief. There is a difference. I slid the utility envelope into to ask about. When I turned back, Evan was no longer looking at me. He was looking toward the mudroom again. I knew then, not fully, not with all the details, but with enough force to alter the air, that this was no single panicked lie. He had come for something. He had likely come for it before. And whatever he had not found yet was still inside my house. I should have said it aloud. I didn't, because even then some part of me was still arranging the pain into manageable stacks. "Go home," I said. He stared at me. "Seriously?" "Yes, so you can do what pace around and let Marlene write a witness statement." The contempt in that was so quick and so casual, it almost passed as humor. Almost. "Go home, Evan." He pushed his chair back hard enough that it scraped the floor. Eleanor would have winced. He knew that. He didn't even glance down. At the mudroom doorway, he stopped. "You know what this is," he said without turning around. "This is what happens when people sit in old houses too long and start treating dust like evidence." Then he picked up his jacket from the front hall chair and left through the front door, not the side. I stood in the kitchen long after I heard his car pull away. Dust like evidence. That one got under my skin because it carried enough truth to tempt me. Old houses do make people strange if they stay alone in them too long. They teach you to hear your own habits and call that company. They let memory occupy rooms rent-free until you start confusing preservation with loyalty. I knew all that. Knew it well enough that for 10 full minutes after he left, I tried to talk myself back into it. Maybe the duplicate bill was a clerical mistake. Maybe he had come for papers and panicked. Maybe the upstairs wrongness looked larger because I had finally gone up there under strain. Maybe Marlene's certainty had sharpened ordinary details. Maybe grief had made me too ready to see pattern where only time had been touching things. I even carried the pot to the sink and scrubbed at the burnt ring harder than necessary, while thinking it as if elbow grease could restore proportion. Then the phone rang again. Claire. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I picked up. "You said you'd call back," she said. "I know." Her voice shifted at once. "What happened?" I told her enough and not too much. The hospital. The missing admission. Marlene seeing Evan at the house. The utility bill with the duplicate address. When I finished, Claire was quiet long enough that I heard her breathing. Then she said, "I'm coming over." "No." "Dad, it's late." That's not an answer. I sat back down at the table. The chair opposite still stood pushed crooked from where Evan had left it. "I don't want a parade in my kitchen. Then you won't get one. You'll get your daughter. There are times in life when your children begin speaking to you the way you once spoke to your parents, and however old you are when it happens, you still feel surprised." "She's right then?" Claire asked softly. "Mom used to say he had the kind of face people trust too quickly." I looked toward the dark hall. "She said that. She said a lot of things you smiled past. It was not cruel. That made it land worse." I rubbed my thumb against the groove where my wedding band had sat for 42 years. The skin still remembered even if the gold was gone. "Come if you want," I said. "I already do." She arrived 25 minutes later, in the same navy pea coat she had worn to Eleanor's funeral. Though maybe that was only my mind tying one night to another, because both had the same damp chill in them. Claire was never sentimental about clothes. Practical to the edge of severity, that one. Hair pinned up, no nonsense on her face. School district ID, still clipped to her bag because she forgot things like that only when something else mattered more. She came in through the side door without using a key. That detail struck me harder than it should have. "I thought you'd locked it," she said when she saw my face. "I did." She looked at the latch, then at me. That silence between us held more than speech would have. We sat at the kitchen table. I made coffee because making coffee has saved more American conversations than wisdom ever did. Claire wrapped both hands around her mug, but barely drank it. I showed her the utility envelope. She read it through once, then again. Brook Hollow Pack and Ship. I nodded. That's not a billing mistake. How do you know? Because schools use private mailboxes for legal service sometimes. That's not something you get by accident. She slid the paper back to me. Someone requested duplicate mailing. Why would he want my electric bills sent there? Claire's eyes moved once toward the ceiling. Proof of occupancy, she said. I stared at her. For what? For anything that wants to establish residence expense, burden, property, linkage, access, account history. She shrugged, but there was no ease in it. I don't know. Loans, applications, development paperwork, some half-baked financing arrangement. Evan has been floating too much for too long. That sentence did more damage than the bill itself. Not because it was new, because it came from her without hesitation. You knew he was in trouble, I asked. I knew he was overextended, and you didn't tell me. I didn't know enough. She looked at me then directly. And if I'm honest, I also knew what would happen if I did. You'd ask him. He'd charm it smaller. You'd decide not to make a war out of speculation. That sat there. Because it was true. After a while, she said, "Show me upstairs." The way she said it made the house feel like a witness waiting to be called. We climbed together. She moved with the same quick, practical steps Eleanor used to take when there was work to do in a room that carried memory. It shook me how much of her mother lived in her only when she stopped trying. At the landing, Claire paused under Lucy's crooked watercolor and straightened it without seeming to realize she had. Then she stepped into the linen corridor and went still. "You see it," I said. She nodded once. "Too tight here," she said, touching the second shelf edge. "And this quilt's been refolded by somebody who doesn't know she always tucked the seam under." She? Claire turned, surprised. Then she understood I meant Eleanor. The pronoun alone had shifted, and I hated that it took this for me to hear it. She moved to the hall closet, opened it, and stood there, studying the shelves. Her hand hovered over the cedar-colored flat storage piece behind the quilt stack, but she did not pull it forward. Instead, she crouched and ran one finger along the latch plate. "Dad, get your flashlight." "Why?" "Because this plate's been scratched." I went downstairs, got the flashlight from the junk drawer, came back up and handed it to her. She angled the beam low. There they were. Fresh, bright slivers where the old brass had been nicked near the strike plate, too new to have dulled into the rest. "Could be from years ago," I said automatically. Claire looked at me over the flashlight. There it was again, that moment when the explanation tries to save itself even while dying. "Maybe," she said. "But no." "How do you know?" "Because Mom had Raymond Pike fix this latch 3 summers ago." She made a whole speech about old house hardware and idiots with flathead screwdrivers. I was right here. The memory hit so quickly it almost took my breath. Summer heat. Eleanor at the landing in shorts and a faded college t-shirt, one hand on her hip, watching Raymond work while pretending not to supervise. She had laughed when he told her the old frame was easy to bully if a person knew how much pressure to use. "Then let's not make it easy," she had said. "I'm raising children in this house, and half of safety is refusing to help foolish people." At the time, Evan had been 29. I must have gone visibly blank because Claire's voice softened. "You remember?" "Yes." "What did she keep in here? Linens, wrapping things, runners, flat boxes." Claire reached past the folded quilt and pulled out a small label card tucked sideways between 2 stacks. Eleanor's handwriting square and neat. "May, rotate for holidays." Nothing frightening in that, just a domestic note. Except the card was out of place. It belonged clipped to the attic bin inventory, not hidden in the hall closet shelf. Claire turned it over. On the back, in lighter pencil almost rubbed away, was one line, "Do not leave all copies together." I felt the whole corridor change around us. Claire looked up slowly. Did you ever see this? No. Did Mom write it? Yes. How sure are you? More sure than I am of anything else tonight. She handed the card to me with care as if it had become breakable while sitting in her fingers. Copies of what she asked. I didn't answer because I didn't have one. Downstairs, the refrigerator kicked on again. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed 2 houses over. The ordinary world kept moving, and for the first time in my own home, that felt unnatural. Claire stepped back from the closet. She knew something, she said. I heard myself answer too quickly. Or she was doing what she always did, keeping track of household papers. Claire's face changed. Not anger. Sadness sharpened by old frustration. Dad, I'm just saying it could mean any number of things, and you'll keep saying that until a document climbs into your lap and signs its own affidavit. That's enough. She folded her arms. No, it isn't. We stood there in the corridor full of Eleanor's order and our own unfinished loyalties. The tension between a father and daughter looks different in middle age than it does when she is 16. Less heat, more history. Claire lowered her voice because houses hear better when voices rise. She was leaving breadcrumbs for someone, she said. Maybe for you, maybe for herself, but not for him. Don't. Don't what talk like you know. Her mouth tightened. I know more than you think. I looked at her. She looked away, first down the hall toward the attic pull-down. Then, quietly enough that I almost missed it, she said, Mom asked me once if I remembered where she kept the Christmas linens. The corridor seemed to narrow. When? The fall before she died. What exactly did she say? Claire pressed her lips together, searching memory. She said, if your father ever goes looking for what matters, tell him not to start where men start. I thought she meant the file cabinet, or the garage. I thought she was making one of her little jokes. What else? She asked me whether you had ever learned the difference between where she stored things and where you assumed she stored them. I sat down hard on the small landing bench beneath the watercolor. The wood creaked. Why didn't you tell me this before? Claire looked almost angry with herself, because she was dying Dad. Half of what she said in those months sounded like practical instruction, and the other half sounded like grief wearing an apron. I didn't know which was which. Neither had I. That truth stayed between us a long minute. Then Claire said, call Raymond. Now, yes, now. If that latch was touched recently, he'll know. It was nearly 9:30, and I hated calling people at night for anything short of blood or flame. But she was right. I knew she was right. And part of becoming frightened enough is that courtesy begins having to share a room with necessity. Raymond Pike answered on the 4th ring with a voice that sounded like old plywood and black coffee. This better not be a basement flood. It's Daniel Mercer. A pause, then some warmth. Danny. You all right? No. Not exactly. I need you to tell me something if you can. I kept it simple. Hall closet latch. Fresh scratches. Could he come look in the morning? He was quiet a second. You alone? My daughter's here. Good. Send me a picture. Claire had already taken 3 on her phone before I got the sentence out. I read Raymond the number, and 30 seconds later his grunt came through the line. That's new. My grip tightened on the receiver. You sure paint's bright. Edge is clean. Old scratch would have gone dull with the brass. Somebody slipped something there. With what could have been a flat driver. Could have been a putty knife if they knew the frame. Could they have done it by accident? Raymond laughed once, not kindly. Not unless your accident knows exactly where the old wood gives. Claire and I looked at each other across the kitchen. Could a stranger do it? I asked. Sure, if they had patience. But this frame's fussy. Somebody familiar would have an easier time. There it was, not a detective, not a grand pronouncement, just a tradesman telling the truth about hardware, the most believable kind. You still got that old cedar flat in there? He asked. I looked up instinctively, though I was downstairs now. Maybe. Then don't move too much tonight, Raymond said. If somebody came for something specific, let them keep being specific in your mind. Sloppy people search wide. Familiar people search narrow. I thanked him and hung up. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Claire said, "Familiar people search narrow." I sat down again at the kitchen table because my legs had gone unsteady. That was the authority clue I had not wanted, not because it solved anything, because it made the shape of the danger smaller and more intimate, easier to imagine, harder to excuse. Claire walked to the pantry, opened the junk drawer, and came back with Eleanor's yellow carpenter pencil. I stared at it. "I found it under the phone books," she said. "Does it belong there?" "No. It belonged upstairs. Behind Eleanor's ear, usually, or tucked on the linen shelf when she was relabeling bins and muttering about mice or dust or men who stored extension cords like vines." I held out my hand. Claire placed the pencil in it. The paint was worn smooth in one place from Eleanor's thumb. I could see her in that corridor. Again crouched on the stool, drawing neat block letters on white cards, while talking over her shoulder to me about Christmas travel plans, or prescription co-pays, or the absurd number of serving bowls her sister believed necessary for Easter. The memory did not warm me this time. It chilled me, because the pencil downstairs meant something had been carried out of its proper world and dropped where it did not belong. Not by time, not by me, by search. Claire saw it land. "That's not random, Dad." I closed my fingers around the pencil. "No," I said. She went quiet then, in the way good people do when they know one fact too many will break a room open too early. We stayed in the kitchen another half hour, going over practical things in low voices. She asked whether Evan knew about the attic. Of course he knew there was an attic. He had grown up here. She asked whether Eleanor kept financial records in obvious places. "Not financial," I said. "Household." But once I said the word household, I heard how weak it sounded. Eleanor had kept household records, yes, but she had also kept the copies nobody remembered until years later. Appliance warranties from 1998. Tax duplicates clipped to recipe cards. Builder invoices tucked into Christmas wrap tubes because nobody steals what looks boring. She used domestic life as camouflage because she understood something I had spent most of my marriage admiring. Without naming order is easier to hide inside than chaos. At 10:15, Claire stood. "I'm staying." "You're not." "Yes, I am. You have school in the morning. I have an assistant principal and a migraine excuse. You have a son who lied about a hospital to get you out of the house." "I'm fine." "No, you're not." She said it without softness. Then she crossed to the hall closet by the front door, took out the old Afghan we kept for guests, and carried it to the sofa in the den. I almost argued again, then didn't. Some nights dignity lies in surrendering to the obvious. Before she settled in, she stood in the kitchen doorway and said, "Dad." "Yes, if Mom hid something, she hid it in sequence." "What do you mean?" She never trusted random hiding places. She trusted systems. If the hall closet points somewhere, it points somewhere on purpose. Then she turned off the den lamp, leaving only the kitchen light and the soft amber over the stove. I stayed up longer than I meant to. I moved through the first floor, checking things I had not checked in months. Side door deadbolt, pantry window, file crate under the sideboard. Eleanor's old note slots, the utility bills. One by one, I laid them out on the kitchen table. Buckley Electric, City Water, Gas Co-op. Only the electric account showed duplicate mailing. The others did not. That narrowed the thing in a way I did not like. Whoever arranged that had not wanted all my hair. Mail. Just enough of it. Just the document most likely to prove the house was tied to me in a usable way. I thought then of Claire's phrase, proof of occupancy. The words felt ugly in my kitchen. At some point after 11, I climbed the stairs again with the yellow pencil in my pocket and the flashlight in my hand. The house felt different with Claire asleep downstairs. Not safer, exactly. Just witnessed, which is its own kind of courage. The landing lamp was off now, and I did not turn it on. I used the flashlight low, not out of strategy, but because bright light felt disrespectful in Eleanor's corridor, as though I were interrogating a church. The shelves gave back the same wrongness as before. No better for time. No worse either. I took the cedar-colored flat storage piece out this time and set it on the bench. It was not the archive box, just one of Eleanor's old ribbon cases, shallow and empty, except for 2 curled gift tags and a broken spool of gold thread. But beneath it, pressed flat against the shelf, was another mark in the dust. Rectangular, narrower, deeper. Something had sat there for years under the ribbon case and was now slightly misaligned farther back. I ran the flashlight beam along the shelf edge and saw a second brass scrape. My stomach tightened. The thing Marlene saw him carrying had fit there. I did not pull everything out. Not yet. I was beginning finally to understand that if somebody had searched here more than once, then the order of disturbance mattered. The shelf was not just storage anymore. It was sequence. I put the ribbon case back exactly where I had found it. That was new in me too, thinking not like a grieving husband, wandering memory, but like a man trying to preserve a pattern. When I backed out of the closet, my shoulder brushed the little stool Eleanor used for the high shelves. Something slid from underneath it and tapped the floor. I crouched, a folded inventory card, cream-colored edge, softened from years. On the front, in Eleanor's hand, attic Christmas linens / spare runners / school papers. Below that were item numbers, C1, C2, C3. Not odd in itself. Eleanor labeled attic bins the way other women label photo albums or grandchildren's sweaters. What stopped me was the last line written smaller than the rest, almost crowded into the corner. C4, moved after diagnosis. Do not forget why. I had to read it twice before it held still. After diagnosis. Not after Christmas. Not after the roof leak. Not after Lucy's kindergarten art show or Evan's divorce scare or any of the 100 ordinary storms of family life. After diagnosis. The corridor seemed to cool around me. I could see Eleanor, then already thinner, already moving more carefully, already pretending not to notice me noticing. Standing on that stool with a yellow pencil behind her ear, making practical arrangements while I was still telling myself practical arrangements meant hope. And all at once, a memory came back so sharp it hurt. One evening, maybe 6 weeks after the oncologist stopped using words like aggressive and started using phrases like quality of life. I had walked into the kitchen and found Eleanor with 3 stacks of paper spread out under the east window. Bills, recipes, insurance notes. A Christmas card list from the year Lucy was born. I remember leaning down to kiss her temple and saying, "You can leave that. It doesn't matter tonight." She had looked up at me with such tired love I nearly sat down just from the force of it. "It will matter some night," she said. At the time, I heard only housekeeping in that. A sick woman refusing to live carelessly. Now I heard warning. I stood up too fast and had to put one hand against the door frame. The house did not feel haunted. I need to be clear about that, even to myself. It felt worse. It felt interpreted. As if I had been living in a book my wife kept annotated after I stopped reading closely. Downstairs, a board creaked near the den. Claire turning over in sleep, probably. The sound of another person inside the house steadied me enough to move again. I took the attic inventory card downstairs and set it beside the utility bill. Then I stood at the base of the attic pull-down and looked up. The cord hung there just above Reach's small wooden knob, same as always. Eleanor used to make me check the insulation edges twice every October because she never trusted field mice to respect weather. I had not opened the attic since the Christmas after she died, when Claire and I boxed what little we could bear to touch and left the rest as it was. The inventory card in my hand felt heavier than cardboard should. C4 moved after diagnosis. Do not forget why. There are moments when denial does not vanish but becomes too expensive to keep carrying. I had not reached certainty yet. I had reached cost. I fetched the stepladder from the mudroom and set it under the pull cord. Halfway up I stopped and listened. House quiet. Claire asleep downstairs. No engines outside, no tires on wet pavement, just the old, low living sound of beams holding their own weight. I climbed one step higher and pulled the cord. The attic hatch gave with a dry little pop, then swung down in segments. Dust drifted through the flashlight beam. A colder smell came down with it. Cedar, paper, stored cloth, the breath of boxed years. I stood there, looking up into the dark opening I had spent 2 years avoiding. Then I took the flashlight in my right hand, one step at a time, climbed the folding ladder, and raised my head into the attic. The beam found rafters first, then old insulation tucked under the eaves, then plastic bins with Eleanor's label cards clipped squarely to their handles. Christmas linens, spare runners, school papers, exactly as the inventory card said. And there, just beyond the first slope of the roofline, tucked beside the Christmas linen bin, where only someone who understood Eleanor's sequence would think to leave it, sat a shallow cedar box with brass corner clasps catching the light, waiting where she left it. The cedar box was smaller than I expected and heavier than it had any right to be. I stayed crouched there in the attic with one hand on the brass clasp and the flashlight laid across a joist so the beam washed sideways over the lid. Dust moved in it like slow breath. The cold up there had a layered smell to it, cedar, dry paper, old cotton insulation, and underneath all of it, the faint sweet trace of Eleanor's linen soap, so faded I might have told myself I imagined it if the whole night had not already stripped me of that luxury. The box sat beneath the slope of the roof beside the Christmas linen bin, exactly where the inventory card said C4 had been moved after diagnosis. Not hidden in the theatrical sense. Not buried, not locked away in some secret compartment. Just placed where the wrong person would not think to look because he would think in terms of value and fear instead of order and sequence. That was Eleanor. She never trusted drama. She trusted placement. For a minute I did not open it. There is a point in grief when the dead stop being memory and become possibility. If the box held nothing, then I was a lonely old man in his attic at midnight, reading meaning into cedar and dust. If it held something, then my wife had known more than she had said, and my son had not lied to me once in panic, but built his lies against the grain of my own house. I realized then that I was afraid of both answers. Below me, the house gave a soft, settling click in the wall near the landing. I thought of Claire asleep on the den sofa boots, still on the rug, because she'd been too tired or too stubborn to undress all the way. I thought of Evan's face in the kitchen, that tired patience made of correction and contempt. Then I touched the clasp. It opened without resistance. Inside were papers, but not loose ones. Eleanor would not have left anything loose if she meant it to matter. She had grouped them into 3 bundles held with old beige rubber bands and one narrower packet tied in blue ribbon, so faded it might once have matched my coffee mug. On top lay an index marked in her handwriting. Not a letter, not my name, just one line. Keep copies where ordinary men lose interest. I had to close my eyes for a second after reading that because it was so precisely her that my chest hurt. That dry little jab, that practical contempt for grand gestures. She had spent her adult life around men who believed importance announced itself by volume or cost or locks, and she had never once agreed. I picked up the first bundle. Photocopies of checks, not a few, not random. Dozens of them clipped in date order, each with a yellow sticky tag on the top right corner and one of Eleanor's block letter notes. Care Fund, Medical Transport, Home Health, Supplemental Payment. The original Care Fund had been something Claire and I set up during Eleanor's treatment once insurance began pretending there were categories of suffering it did not cover. Friends sent money. My brother sent money. Our church sent money in ways people from decent towns do when they want to help without making you take your hat off. Eleanor had hated the attention and kept perfect records of every dollar because she said generosity deserved bookkeeping as much as taxes did. I sat with the flashlight beam on the checks and felt something slowly turning cold inside me. Several were made out to vendors I recognized. Oxygen supply, home nursing, the woman who sat with Eleanor on Thursdays so I could still mow the yard or pretend to. Then there were checks written to cash, which Eleanor almost never did, tagged with notes in her hand Evan picked up for pharmacy. Evan asked me not to tell Daniel until the account clears. Transferred at Evan's insistence said timing mattered. The words were not angry. That was worse. She had written them the way she wrote grocery clarifications and turkey defrost reminders, with enough calm to preserve accuracy and enough detail to leave no room for later romance. I set that bundle down and opened the second, a thin ledger book, blue cover, the kind you buy at office supply stores and never expect to matter beyond plumbing estimates or church bake sale totals. On the first page, Eleanor had written caregiver reimbursements / temporary family draws / verify later. My thumb rested on the word verify. I turned pages. Each line was hers. Date, amount, purpose, who requested, whether receipt received, whether receipt still pending, whether amount replaced. Some entries had check marks, some had question marks. 3 had square pencil boxes around them, darkened twice as if she came back to them later. Every boxed line had Evan's name next to it, and every boxed line had no receipt. One of them was from 5 months before she died. $7,500? Evan said contracted deposit to prevent loss on lot purchase. Promised repay in 10 days. Strongly objected. Gave under pressure. I stared at that sentence until the words split from one another. Gave under pressure. A memory rose up so fast it made me grab the attic floor to steady myself. Eleanor in the downstairs bedroom, thin enough by then that even her wedding ring had begun to slip. Evening rain at the windows. Evan standing near the dresser, saying he had a timing issue, just timing, nothing catastrophic, and me in the hall were hearing only the rise and fall of voices, but not the words. When I came in, Eleanor had smiled too quickly and said we were discussing whether he should borrow my trailer for the weekend. I remembered believing her because I wanted to, because treatment had already made the house a place of nausea and pain and softened food and medical language, and I could not bear to think my son would add money pressure to that room. Now I saw it plainly. He had not added pressure to the room. He had brought it there on purpose. The attic around me changed in that moment, not visually, morally. What had been storage became witness. Those rafters had sat over our marriage, while I moved through my wife's dying months, believing the only enemy in the house was disease. Meanwhile, my son had stood in her doorway and pressed her for money she did not trust him with. The third bundle held copies of property notices and LLC filings I did not fully understand at first glance. But I knew enough to see Evan's name linked to Mercer Ridge Development and Mercer Ridge linked to parcels outside Brook Hollow. I vaguely remembered him bragging about at Thanksgiving 2 years back. There were lien notices, extension requests, a demand letter photocopy with one corner circled in pencil, a typed page Eleanor had marked with a yellow line beneath the phrase personal guarantee exposure. There was also a business card paper-clipped to one of the notices. A lawyer in Columbus. I turned it over, and on the back in Eleanor's hand. If Daniel ever needs this, it is already too late for politeness. I let out one breath through my nose, then almost a laugh, and not remotely one. That woman could still cut me from the grave. The blue ribbon packet was last. I knew before I untied it that it would hurt worse than the rest. It was not a letter exactly. Not one smooth statement. More like the beginning of one. 3 typed pages unsigned with corrections in Eleanor's pen. No greeting, no date, just text. If this statement is being read, I was unable to complete the conversation myself. I stopped there, took my glasses off, put them back on. The attic was very quiet. Quiet enough that I could hear the slight tremor in my own breathing. I read the pages slowly, once as husband, once as father, and once as a man who understood by the second page that the first 2 readings had not been enough. Eleanor had set down plainly, and without ornament, that Evan had come to her more than once during her illness asking for money, asking for silence, asking her not to burden me, because Dad's already gone in the eyes when you're sick. She wrote that he had framed the drawers as temporary and urgent, then grown more insistent when she asked for receipts. She wrote that he used words like bridge timing, temporary cover, and no point upsetting him now. She wrote that she believed he had used some of the care fund money to patch a development exposure he had not fully disclosed. She wrote that she had kept copies and separate notes because she did not trust his memory when it became inconvenient. And then came the line that cut deepest. I have not told Daniel the full extent because treatment has already made this house a place of fear, and I do not want my last months to teach him that our son can enter a room of pain and use it. I put the pages down and covered my mouth with my hand. There are griefs that arrive cleanly. Death, diagnosis, the phone call in the middle of the night, and then there are griefs that arrive sideways years later and rewrite the old ones into something more humiliating. This was that kind. Not only that Eleanor knew, not only that Evan had done it, but that she chose to carry the uglier knowledge partly to spare me. Spare me. I sat in the attic with that word and felt my old story of myself begin to fail in places I had not even realized it rested. I had always thought my gentleness helped keep this family from hardening into something mean. Now it seemed possible my gentleness had simply given sharper people extra room. By the time I came down from the attic, the eastern windows had begun to gray. I found Claire awake on the sofa, shoes still on one arm over her eyes. She lowered it when she heard me. Well, I stood there at the den threshold, holding the cedar box against my ribs like something that had survived fire, and I had not. She knew, I said. Claire sat up. About what? About him, about money, about more than money. I carried the box to the kitchen table and laid everything out in order. Checks first, ledger next, property papers, then the unsigned statement. Claire did not interrupt while she read. She had Eleanor's way with documents. Eyes steady, fingertips. Careful silence used as tool rather than absence. Once, when she reached the line about Dad's eyes being gone during treatment, her mouth tightened. That was all. When she finished, she looked at me a long moment. He did this while she was sick. It was not a question. Yes. And she kept the record up here because she thought he'd come looking. Yes. How long? That was the first time either of us asked the right question. Not, is something wrong? Not, what did he mean? How long? I sat down because my legs had started to feel borrowed, long enough that she had a system. Claire stared at the papers again. Then she said very quietly, "Then he's been studying the house for just as long." There was no melodrama in that line. None was needed. It put all the small things in order. The side door, the upstairs glances, the precision of his explanations, the duplicate utility mail, the way he had used Lucy's name not as panic but as a key cut to the shape of my weakness. The kitchen table under the east window had always been where Eleanor reconciled things. Bills, guest lists, recipe corrections, school forms, who was arriving Thursday, whether we had enough napkins for Easter. That morning it became something else. A tribunal, maybe, or a dissection. The house no longer felt like it was keeping her memory. It felt like it had been asked to keep her proof. Claire read the property papers more closely than I could that early. She found the names faster. Mercer Ridge Development. Co-signatory exposure. A demand letter tied to an unpaid contractor. A lien recording date from 8 months after the $7,500 draw. She slid one photocopy toward me and tapped a highlighted paragraph. "This is what he was trying to cover," she said, "or part of it. If he used family money to bridge one part and then represented a stronger position somewhere else." You sound like a lawyer. I sound like someone who has watched Evan explain 10 versions of the same whole. I rubbed both hands over my face. What do we do? There was the father in me still asking, like the room held options that didn't cost blood. Claire looked at the unsigned statement. We stop pretending this is family static. I did not want that to be the answer. I need to know what's current, I said. You do. And I need to know whether these filings still matter, or if they're just old damage. You do. And if I take this to someone, then what? Then Claire said someone besides you has to say out loud what he did. Morning came thin and unwelcome. Claire called the school and got her migraine excuse. I called Raymond Pike and asked him to come by on his way to a cabinet job in Westfield. Then I called the number on the Columbus lawyer's card and got a voicemail and a receptionist in the wrong office, and finally an assistant who told me the attorney had retired last year, but the firm remained open. I did not leave details. I was not ready yet. That phrase embarrassed me the moment I thought it. Not ready. Eleanor had been ready enough to type a statement while dying. I was sitting in a good kitchen with coffee and daylight, still using readiness as if it were a weather system that might arrive on its own. I carried the papers back upstairs just before Raymond came. That was the first deliberate move I made that morning as something other than a wounded man. I did not leave the evidence spread out on the kitchen table like righteousness. I put it back in the cedar box and returned the box to the attic, but not exactly as before. I changed the angle by half an inch. Left one ribbon knot tied loosely. Set the Christmas linen bin a little farther forward. Nothing theatrical, just enough that anyone returning to the box would tell me by his touch. When I came back down, the house felt different because I had done something to it on purpose. Not just lived inside it. Not just remembered in it. Used it. Raymond arrived at 9 with sawdust on one sleeve and a thermos bigger than his sympathy. He came through the side door, studied the latch without being asked, then looked once at my face before saying anything. You sleep, no? Good. Means you're probably seeing straight. He climbed the stairs with me and said almost nothing until we reached the hall closet. Then he crouched, thumbed the strike plate, ran his nail along the scratch line, and checked the wood inside the jamb. This wasn't tonight, he said. How old? He shrugged. Could be days, could be a couple weeks, not months. A couple weeks. The words entered the house like smoke. You sure as I get without lying for a living? He pointed. See here, fresh compression on old paint. Whoever did it pushed the same place more than once. Learned the give, more than once. I felt the landing tilt a little under me, though it didn't move at all. Raymond stood, glanced around the corridor, then at the shelf spacing the way a craftsman reads tension before he reads design. Somebody knew what they wanted, he said. What makes you say that? He reached toward the folded quilt, not touching it. They didn't disturb the whole shelf. Just enough to access something behind or under. Amateur burglars make a mess. Familiar people try to put your life back when they're done. Familiar people. There was that phrase again. He looked at me then, and maybe he saw more than I said because his voice lowered. If this is family. Danny family doesn't make it less of an entry. That line did something important in me. Not because I needed permission to know right from wrong. Because I needed to hear another man say that blood was not a solvent. When Raymond left, he wrote his assessment on the back of one of his business cards in all caps carpenter print. Recent tool marks. Repeated access attempt. Someone new frame give. I put the card in my shirt pocket and felt it there all day like a splinter. By early afternoon I had done something else new. I stopped cleaning up behind the fear. Normally, if a cushion sat wrong, or a drawer stayed half open, or a towel skewed off center, I corrected it by reflex. That day I left things where they were. I kept the upstairs shelf spacing wrong. I left the side door mat as it lay. I began for the first time to understand that tidiness can erase testimony. I also began noticing the house in another register entirely. The mudroom was no longer just where boots dried. It was a traffic report. The pantry crock was no longer where keys belonged. It was a sign of access. The stairs were not memory alone. They were a boundary line someone had learned I seldom crossed. Even the kitchen table changed on me. For 2 years it had been an altar to Eleanor's domestic steadiness. Now it was also the place where I had most often mistaken her order for harmlessness. That hurt. In the middle of the afternoon, the phone rang. Evan. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hey," he said, too casual. "You doing okay?" There are few things more frightening than a calm voice from the person who has already shown he can build a lie without sweat. Not rage, not threats, just normality, so smooth it becomes pressure. "I'm here," I said. "Claire called Jenna." It was not a question, which meant he was calling not for information but measurement. And Jenna's upset. She'll survive." He went quiet at that. He had not expected resistance phrased so plainly. Then he chuckled once soft. "You really are making a whole thing out of this." I leaned against the sink and looked out at the hydrangeas. "Did you come to the house more than once before yesterday?" I asked. A pause. "What?" "You heard me." His tone sharpened, but only slightly. "No." "You sure, Dad, if you want to accuse me, at least have the decency to say what of?" I almost admired the sentence. Almost. Instead, I said, "Why did you have my electric bill sent to a private mailbox?" He inhaled. It was tiny. But I heard it. "What are you talking about, the duplicate mail?" "Buckley Electric, Brook Hollow. That's probably for permit cross-reference." My heart thudded once hard. Not because of what he said, because he answered too specifically too fast. For what permit, I don't know. There was a property boundary question last year. They might have needed utility verification. You said you didn't know what I was talking about. Now, silence again. Then very evenly he said, "This is exactly what I mean. You pick up half an administrative thing and suddenly it's evidence of what fraud burglary, a conspiracy in your linen closet." He let the last phrase go light, almost amused. My grip tightened on the sink edge. He knows the linen closet, I thought. Not generically. Specifically enough to mock it before I said it. "Why are you asking about permits and utility cross-reference if you only came for insurance papers?" I asked. There was no answer to that for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "I'm trying to help you think like a normal person." That line, more than any shout, might have made my skin go cold. Because it was correction again. Gentle, managerial, almost loving in its tone. The voice of a son making space around his father's confusion. The voice a neighbor would trust. A banker, a clerk, a responding officer if things got ugly enough for uniforms. It was calm realism sharpened into a blade. I heard myself say, "How long did you know your mother kept copies?" And for the first time in the whole conversation, he lost the rhythm. Jesus, Dad. Not denial, not outrage, just impact. It lasted less than a second, but I had already stopped needing much. When he spoke again, he had softened himself. "You need to stop," he said. "You really do. You're taking old grief and making it do work. It shouldn't." Old grief. He had built his whole access system out of that phrase. I looked up at the ceiling as if I could see through it into the attic eaves. "You used Lucy's name," I said quietly. "That's what you chose?" Another pause. Then just as quietly, "I'll come by tonight. We'll sit down. I'll bring dinner." There it was. The calm man offering to restore normalcy inside the very house he had used. He made it sound generous, corrective, like he was the larger person stepping toward a smaller one. I said no. He said, "I'm coming anyway. I'm not letting you spiral because Marlene Beauchamp saw a car." Then he ended the call before I could answer. I stood there a long time after that phone still in my hand. He's coming anyway. That was when the question changed fully in me. Not is something wrong. Not even what is he after. How long has he been timing this house against me? By late afternoon I had an answer to something else, or enough of one. Claire, who had spent the day moving between my printer, her laptop, and 3 county websites with the fierce competence of a woman tired of cleaning up mail denial, called me to the dining room table where she had made herself a war desk out of property maps and coffee cups. "Come here." I went. She turned the screen toward me. Mercer Ridge Development, OLC. Evan's name. 2 other partners. One of the parcels under current lien notice matched the contractor demand letter in Eleanor's box. Another filing listed a utility verification packet submitted 19 days earlier. 19 days, the duplicate electric bill. I stared at the date until it blurred. 19 days ago, Claire said, her voice flat now in the way it got when emotion had already turned into function. And the supporting packet says residence continuity requested. For what? For financing continuation and occupancy representation. I sat down slowly. That means he used my address. Yes. Without asking. Yes. The word yes began to feel like a hammer. Can they do that? They can try. And if the box upstairs proves he patched earlier money problems with care fund draws, then the whole thing looks very different, Claire said. I looked down at my hands. There is a kind of fatherly shame that has nothing to do with what your child did, and everything to do with how long you insisted on telling the story of him kindly enough that other people had to do their damage around your tenderness. I felt that then, not abstractly, physically, in the stomach, in the jaw, in the old muscles between my shoulders that had spent years lowering themselves every time Evan made one more disappointment sound temporary. At some point, I stood and went back upstairs alone, not to find a new clue, not even to think, just because the house had become the place where truth stood still long enough to be looked at, and I needed that more than I needed comfort. The landing at that hour held a different light, thin gold slipping in through the west side window near the bathroom. Lucy's watercolor had gone pale in it. The linen corridor looked narrower than it had the night before, though of course it wasn't. Fear does that to long spaces. I opened the master bedroom door for the first time in weeks. The room had been preserved by neglect more than intention. Bed still made with the blue coverlet Eleanor liked in spring. Her robe hanging inside the closet where I had not touched it. The faint lemon polish smell long gone from the dresser, replaced by quiet. I stood at the threshold and let the room accuse me properly. This was my blind spot, not just grief, arrangement. I had let avoidance masquerade as respect. I told myself not entering certain rooms honored what they held. In truth, I had surrendered territory, to dust, to silence, to whoever understood that untouched things are easier to search because the person who loves them fears changing them. That recognition changed the room more completely than any clue had. The master bedroom stopped being shrine and became evidence of my own cooperation. I did not stay long, but I entered. That mattered. On the way back through the corridor, I looked again at the shelf, the stool, the labels, and then up toward the attic hatch. The house no longer felt hostile. In the vague way frightened people use that word, it felt organized around consequences. Every place I had refused was now a place somebody else had used. By 6, rain had started again. Claire heated leftover lasagna from the freezer because she is her mother's daughter and believes carbohydrates improve strategy. We ate in near silence. Neither of us wanted to say Evan's name unless necessary. The den lamp came on. The porch light clicked on by timer. Water struck the windows softly. At 6:30, Detective Lena Ortiz called me back. I had left a careful voicemail an hour earlier, after finding her number through the contractor letter and a county complaint reference Claire unearthed online. I expected delay, maybe skepticism. Instead, I got a woman whose voice sounded like she filed nouns sharply. Mr. Mercer. Yes. This is Detective Ortiz. You mentioned documents connected to Mercer Ridge and possible family financial misuse. Possible. Family. Misuse. 3 words I had once hoped never to hear in one sentence with my name. Yes. How much documentation, copies of checks, a ledger, property papers, a statement my wife drafted, originals, copies. A pause, not dismissive, measuring. Do the checks relate to a medical care fund? My fingers tightened on the phone. Yes. Another pause. Mr. Mercer, have these documents been moved recently? Disturbed, searched for anything like that. I looked up at the ceiling. Yes. All right, she said. Then listen carefully. Do not confront with paperwork in hand. Do not leave the documents visible, and do not assume the search was only about money already spent. That line landed harder than the rest. What do you mean? If your wife copied filings tied to current exposure, then the person looking may be trying to remove proof of prior knowledge. That matters more than the amount. Prior knowledge. I closed my eyes. So this isn't just, I almost said, family trouble. She spared me the phrase. It may be family trouble, she said, but it's also evidence trouble. The kitchen clock ticked twice in the silence that followed. Can you come tonight? I asked. Not tonight. Tomorrow morning, if you can keep the documents secure, and avoid signaling that you know exactly what's in them. I thought of Evan saying he would come by anyway. He may come here, I said. He probably will. I absorbed that. How are you so sure? Because calm people who search twice usually come back when the pattern changes. That sentence turned the whole house inside out for me. Calm people who search twice. Not intruder, not suspect. Searcher, Mr. Mercer, she said, and her tone changed just enough to become human without losing shape. If he believes you're still confused, let him. Don't give him your certainty for free. When I hung up, I remained seated with the dead phone in my hand and understood something simple and terrible. This could not be handled privately anymore because privacy itself had been part of the weapon. I told Claire what Ortiz said. She leaned both palms on the table and nodded once. Then, tonight matters. That was the point of no return, though I did not yet know the exact form it would take. Not because the detective had said fraud or evidence, because she had described him in the only way that made all the rooms make sense. Calm. The frightening thing about Evan was not that he was wild enough to do harm. It was that he could do harm without leaving the temperature of a sentence. We spent the next hour not talking about morality at all. We talked about sightlines. That may sound cold, but houses demand specifics when truth is finally asked of them. From the den's sofa, you could hear the side door, but not see the mudroom. From the kitchen table, you could see the mudroom and stairs. From the foot of the stairs, you could hear the attic hatch if the house was otherwise quiet. The porch light reflected badly on the front hall glass after dark. The old hardwood 2 steps below the landing still clicked under weight, no matter how softly you took them. I moved through each space differently now. Not like a victim. Not like a detective either. Like a man reclaiming roots. That was the deliberate move Part 3 demanded of me, though I would not have called it that then. I took the cedar box from the attic again just before dusk, checked the contents, then wrapped the 3 bundles exactly as Eleanor had, except for one small thing. I left the blue ribbon less tightly knotted than before. Not obvious. Not to anyone who didn't care, but enough that if it was retied by different hands, I would know. Then I put the box back, not shoved under deeper cover, not moved to a bank box or my truck or Claire's trunk. Back where Eleanor placed it, because by then I understood the trap was not bait in the cheap sense. It was geography. Evan's whole confidence depended on believing I was still the man who would not stay in that room. At 7:10 he texted, heading over, bringing soup. I looked at the screen a long time. Soup. The ordinary cruelty of it nearly made me smile. The night he lied me out of the house, I had ruined my own soup because I believed him. Now he was coming with soup like a son tending an overreactive old father. I texted back, doors open. That was a lie. Claire watched me from the den doorway and said nothing, just nodded once. By 7:30, the rain had thickened. The windows blurred with it. The porch light threw weak gold through the wet. I changed my shirt, put Raymond's card and Eleanor's attic inventory note in my pocket, left the kitchen light on, left the den dark, left the side doormat exactly where it had been since yesterday. At 7:45, another text. Running late. Eat if you want. I did not answer. At 8:10, Claire said, "He's checking whether you'll settle back into waiting." I knew she was right. At 8:20, I climbed to the attic with the flashlight, my phone, and the old ache that now had direction. I did not tell Claire not to follow. I did not tell her to stay downstairs. I simply said, "If he comes, give him the house." She looked at me long enough to understand. Then I went up. The attic at dusk was not the same room as the attic by morning. The last light leaked through the vent slats and laid itself thin across the rafters. The eaves held cold already. The Christmas linen bin looked like a patient thing waiting to be named. Beside it sat the cedar box with its brass corners and its loosened ribbon inside, not an heirloom now, but a charge. I sat on an old trunk 3 feet from it and listened. This was the most frightened I had been all day, and the clearest. Below me the house had its evening voice, heat clicking, Claire moving once in the kitchen, rain at the gutters, the distant thud of a car door somewhere beyond the hedge. Each sound arrived distinct, separated. I was no longer asking whether my son would come. I was asking which route he would trust. That was father activation, I suppose, though it did not feel heroic. It felt old in the best and worst way, like finally using patience for something other than excuse. While I waited, another memory came. Not invited, not gentle. One Thanksgiving, maybe 6 years ago, before Eleanor got sick, Evan had shown up early while Claire was still bringing pies from the car. I had been in the garage wrestling a folding table when I heard laughter inside. Not happy laughter. Polished laughter. By the time I came in, Evan was standing by the sideboard with Eleanor, and she was smiling in that thin social way she used when she had no intention of arguing in front of company. He had his arm around her shoulders, too affectionate by half, and was saying, "See, she knows I always land on my feet." At the time, I took it for family banter. Now, in the attic, I remembered the way Eleanor's hand rested flat on the sideboard edge as if bracing. I remembered a white envelope disappearing under Evan's folio when Claire came in from the cold. I remembered Eleanor looking across the room at me for half a second, then looking away. That memory was spoiled now. Not ruined exactly. Corrupted. A thing I had once trusted turned to evidence by later light. Downstairs, the kitchen chair legs scraped once. Then quiet. Then, after a long stillness, the faint buzz of my phone in my palm. Claire. "He's here?" I did not answer. Just locked the screen and listened harder. The front porch gave nothing. No bell. No knock. My pulse began climbing. 3 seconds later, from the back side of the house, soft through rain and walls, and all the old lumber between floors, I heard it. The side door opened. The side door opened. Even through the walls and rain and the old bones of the house, I knew the sound of it. That particular lift in the handle. The brief resistance in the frame. Then the softened close of somebody who had learned by practice which doors in my house announced themselves and which ones could be persuaded not to. I stayed where I was. That was the first victory, and maybe the hardest. Not moving, not rushing down the fold-out ladder in some old reflex of authority, not calling his name into the dark and letting him decide the terms of the room. I stayed seated on the attic trunk beneath the eaves with the cedar box 3 feet away, and the flashlight laid beside me and my phone silent in my pocket. The rafters held the dusk. The old Christmas linens held their faint scent of cedar and dry cotton. The house did not feel haunted. It felt awake. Below me, floorboards spoke in small, careful sounds. The mudroom first, then the kitchen. A pause there. I pictured him standing in the room where Eleanor and I had paid bills and eaten soup and corrected Lucy's spelling words and carried each other through ordinary American evenings that turned out in the end to be the thing we had really built. I pictured his eyes moving over the sink, the pantry crock, the sideboard, the staircase, measuring what had changed, measuring whether I had changed with it. Then came the soft scrape of a chair leg in the kitchen. Not loud, just enough to tell me he had stopped pretending to himself. He was not there to bring dinner anymore. He was there to see whether I knew. Another pause, then the stairs. You can tell who is climbing an old staircase by what they believe about the house. Claire climbs directly practical and unembarrassed. Marlene Beauchamp climbs as if apologizing to the wood. Eleanor used to climb in rhythms, too quick one, slower, because she was always thinking of something halfway up. Evan climbed like a man entering familiar property after hours. Not timid, not bold, economical. The second step below the landing clicked. He stopped. Then the landing board near Lucy's watercolor answered him a second later. He was up. I could hear the way he moved through the corridor without seeing him. Closet first, shelf check, breathing shallower now. He knew enough not to make noise and not enough to understand that silence in a house can magnify intent worse than footsteps. There was a shift in air under the attic hatch when he stepped beneath it. Then nothing. Waiting, trying to decide whether to trust what the house had told him about me for years. My pulse was hitting hard now, not with panic, but with force. There is a difference. Panic loosens thought. Force narrows it. I sat there in the dark room my grief had abandoned and understood more clearly than I ever had downstairs in any righteous kitchen speech that this was where fatherhood changed shape. Not because I was going to stop being his father. Nothing so clean. Because I was going to stop being the version of his father he had learned to use. The attic ladder creaked. One section down, then another. I did not raise the flashlight. I waited until his head and shoulders rose through the opening and the last of the hallway light behind him cut a pale bar across the floorboards. He came up, crouched, one hand on the frame, breathing through his mouth. He wore the same rain jacket as the night before, though drier, now darker at the cuffs. He saw the outline of the bin first, then the box, then me. He froze. That moment lasted only a second or two, but it was enough. Enough for me to see his face emptied of the useful expressions he wore downstairs. No concern, no managerial patience, no irritated son trying to manage an old man's imagination, just impact. Calculation stripped bare before it could dress itself again. I picked up the flashlight and turned it on. The beam caught him in the eyes. He flinched once and blinked hard, then looked away toward the cedar box. The mask began reassembling almost immediately. "Jesus, Dad," he said low. "What are you doing up here?" It would have been almost impressive if it had not cost so much to watch. "Waiting," I said. He stayed half-crouched near the hatch, another second before climbing fully into the attic. He brushed dust from one knee in a gesture too precise to be nervous and too practiced to be natural. Then he straightened, but not all the way. The pitch of the roof kept both of us slightly bent, which felt right for what we were in. "You could have answered your phone," he said. "I knew where you were headed." "That right?" "Yes." He gave a short, incredulous laugh and looked around as if embarrassed for me. "You're sitting in the attic in the dark because of some papers and a neighbor with too much time." I let that sit. Then I said, "You came through the side door again." He shrugged. "It sticks less than the front in weather." There it was. Calm realism. Even now, the little ordinary sentence meant to sand danger smooth. Not I didn't come for the box. Not why would I do this. Just a household preference offered by a son who knew the door. My eyes went to the cedar box. His did too. That was enough to make the room smaller. "How long have you known it was here?" I asked. His jaw worked once, then he made himself smile without warmth. "You're asking bad questions, Dad." "No, I've been asking bad questions for years. Tonight I'm asking the right ones." He looked at me differently then. Not as a burden, not as a problem to manage, as a variable. "Whatever you think you found," he said, "it's not what you think." I nodded once. "That sentence has been carrying you a long time." For the first time, a little anger showed, not hot, worse than that, contempt under strain. You want to know what's carrying me, he said, cleaning up after people who believe order is the same as wisdom. He said it while looking not at me, but at the box. The attic seemed to take the line and hold it. I stood slowly from the trunk. My knee protested, my back pulled. I did not hurry any part of it. That mattered. Haste would have given him youth. Slowness left me with something better. You asked your dying mother for money in the room where she slept, I said. The anger disappeared from his face the instant the sentence landed. Not because he felt guilt, because he realized the depth of what I knew. I did not. You used the care fund. Don't, he said quickly. Do not start saying things out loud that you don't understand. I had expected denial. That was not denial. That was protection. Not of innocence, of framing. You told her not to burden me, I said. You told her I was already gone in the eyes when she was sick. The color shifted in his face. You read that? Yes. He took one step toward me. Not threatening, not yet, just forgetting himself enough to move. Those were private notes. They were my wife's notes. They were not for you. That was the moment his normal mask failed fully. Not because he shouted. He didn't. Because the truth of what he believed arrived in the room before he could restrain it. He did not believe those pages belonged to the marriage they described. He believed they belonged to whoever got there first, to whoever could control meaning. I felt something in me go very still. You think she wrote them for ownership, I said. His mouth opened, then closed. Is that what this house is to you? I asked. Access. Timing. What gets left where if you scare the right person out the door? Don't do this, he said. Don't turn one desperate period into some grand moral fantasy about Mom. Desperate for who? For all of us. That came out sharper, louder. Too quick. He heard it himself and tried to recover, but too late. He straightened as much as the roof allowed and dragged a hand through his hair. You know what it was like, he said, forcing his voice back down. You know what that time cost. Nurses, transport, prescriptions, insurance didn't cover the house changes, all of it. Everybody was drowning and nobody was talking honestly. I needed help. She had help sitting there. The care fund was for her. It was for the family surviving her. The words stayed in the attic like something toxic. I stared at him. Below us, a floorboard cracked lightly on the landing. Claire, maybe. Or just the old house settling under the weight of truth. Either way, Evan heard it too. His eyes flicked toward the hatch, then back to me. Calculation returned, but thinner now. He was no longer controlling the room. He was triaging it. You brought somebody, he said. I brought the house, I said. It sounds theatrical now when I remember it, but in the room it did not. In the room it was the plainest thing I could say, because everything we stood among Eleanor's labels, the Christmas linens, the archived proof tucked into ordinary storage, had been waiting longer than either of us. He looked at the box again. What do you want? He asked. There it was. Not what do you believe, not how do we fix this, what do you want? The language of settlement, of transaction, of a man who still thought pain became manageable once converted to terms. I want you to say why you came tonight. His face hardened. No. Then I'll say it for you. You don't know enough. I know you used Lucy's name because you knew I'd leave dinner on the stove and run. I know you came through the side door because you knew the front would announce you. I know you searched here more than once because Raymond Pike read the latch marks and because Marlene wrote the times down when your car returned. I know you had my electric account sent to a private mailbox 19 days ago because you needed residence continuity on paper. And I know your mother kept copies because she understood what kind of man asks a dying woman to carry his secrets. He took another step then. More in it this time. Enough that my body noticed. I did not move. That was the hero moment, if there is one in stories like this. Not striking him, not shouting him down. Standing in the attic I had abandoned and refusing to give him even a backward inch. The room depended on that more than any clever speech. You think this makes you righteous, he said. No, it makes you late. That one hit, because it was true. Too true. I let it hit. Yes, I said. It does. He blinked. Maybe he expected defense. Maybe outrage. What he got was the one thing he had not built a response for agreement without surrender. I was late, I said. Your mother knew it before I did. She kept the record because she didn't trust me to see you clearly in time. The attic changed again then. Not in lighting, in authority. The second I said that aloud, I stopped protecting the story of myself that had helped protect him. His face tightened into something uglier than anger. Injury, maybe. The deep old, childish one. The one Eleanor had always feared more than his charm. You always make me the problem, he said. Always. Claire gets to be practical. Mom gets to be saintly. And I get to be the one whose mistakes mean something permanent. Mistakes, I said. He laughed without humor. You know what Dad taught me growing up? That there'd always be enough if you worked hard and kept your nose clean. But there isn't enough anymore. Not how it works now. Not if you want to build anything. Not if you don't want to die in a house where every light switch is older than your grandchildren. He swept one hand through the attic, through the bins, through the stored years of our life as if they offended him by existing. She understood that, he said. Mom understood pressure. Your mother understood pressure, I said. That's how she recognized what you were doing to her. His mouth flattened. For a second, the only sound was rain at the gutters and my own blood moving. Then he said very quietly, she also understood that you could not handle another collapse. That one was aimed true. Not because it excused him, because it used her kindness as evidence of my weakness. The old me would have flinched into apology there, into explanation, into a defense of my capacity that would have let him retake the terms. Instead, I said, she handled me with mercy. You handled me with access. He looked away first. That mattered more than any shout. The attic ladder creaked then once, and Detective Lena Ortiz's voice came from below, dry and steady. Mr. Mercer. Evan's whole body shifted. There are moments when a lie collapses not because it is disproved, but because it realizes it no longer controls who is listening. He turned toward the hatch, too quickly saw Claire behind Ortiz on the landing, and understood in one glance that the room had grown witnesses. I had not heard Claire call them in. Good. That meant she did not need my permission anymore either. Ortiz came up only far enough to keep us both in view. She did not crowd the space. Smart woman, attics do not reward too many bodies. Evening, she said to Evan. He said nothing. Her gaze went to the cedar box, then to me. Is that the material we discussed? Yes. Has anyone touched it since you last opened it? I looked at Evan. No. She looked at him too. Then let's keep it that way. He found his voice then, and with it one last attempt at normalcy. This is insane, he said. You called a detective because of family records in an attic. Ortiz did not even blink. No. I came because copied financial records tied to an active development exposure were hidden after the reporting party's wife documented repeated pressure, and because there is independent witness support for recent attempts to locate or remove those records. Independent witness support. Not dramatic, not personal, just enough official language to take his preferred oxygen out of the room. He looked at Claire. You did this. She stood on the landing in the dim hall light with her arms folded. Eleanor's daughter down to the bones of it. No, she said. You did. He stared at her a second, and something in his face went raw at last. Not the practiced injury. The real one. The one that had spent years believing intelligence was unfair if it was turned against him. You always hated me for needing more, he said. Claire's expression did not move. I hated what Mom had to become to survive you. That landed harder than anything I had said. He turned back to me then, maybe because he thought fatherhood could still be used where sibling truth could not. His voice changed, softer, lower, more frightened now, finally, than angry. "Dad," he said, "don't do this in front of them. Them, not Claire, not the detective. Just externality, witness." I felt all at once the whole terrible architecture of the last years. The way he kept things private, not out of loyalty, but because privacy was the room where he was strongest. The way he used my reluctance to expose family ugliness as if it were a hallway light he could switch on and off. This was the last false belief to go. That decency required concealment. "No," I said. "This is the first time I'm not doing it in private." He stared at me. I went on, voice steady, because the room deserved steadiness more than it deserved volume. "You came to your mother while she was sick and pressed her for money she was keeping for her care. You told her not to tell me because it would burden me. You had my bills sent where you could use them. You came back into this house through the side door because grief had taught you where I would not look. You used your daughter's name to clear me out of my own home, and tonight you climbed into the room you believed I'd stay too broken to enter. There are speeches that feel written and speeches that feel excavated. That one was the second kind. Nothing grand in it, just truth finally standing upright." His eyes went bright, not with tears exactly, but with the pressure behind them. "You think you know what it cost to build anything," he said. "You think because Mom made lists and kept notes that makes her right about all of it." "No," I said. "It makes her honest." He drew a breath too fast. Then the last of the mask tore. "She liked being right," he said. "That's what none of you ever admit. She liked keeping score. She liked making me feel like every time I asked for something, there was already a ledger waiting." The words bounced off the rafters and stayed there. I thought of Eleanor on the landing stool, pencil behind her ear, straightening labels. Of her in the kitchen after chemo, too tired to stand long still, writing down who had paid what because dignity mattered to her even when strength did not. Of her sitting in that downstairs room knowing our son could enter pain and still make a demand. "She kept a ledger because she was paying attention," I said. He looked like he wanted to answer, but the answer would have required him to stop hating the witness and speak to the harm. He could not do it. Maybe never had. Ortiz took one step higher. "Mr. Mercer," she said to him, "I'm going to advise you to leave the box where it is and come downstairs." He laughed once, cracked through with disbelief. "On what basis?" She held his eyes. "On the basis that this is still his house. Those materials have evidentiary relevance, and your own statements tonight are not helping your position." There was a beat there where I thought he might lunge for the box out of sheer ruin, not because he was violent by nature, because certain men reach when language fails. If he thought it, he thought better of it. His shoulders dropped an inch. That was the collapse. Not dramatic, not cinematic in the loud sense. More devastating than that. A man realizing the room no longer bends toward his version of reality. "All right," he said. But he did not sound all right. He sounded emptied. We went down carefully, one body at a time, because old attic ladders do not care about family apocalypse. Evan first, then Ortiz, then me. Claire waited on the landing, leaving the watercolor crooked above her shoulder. Lucy's crooked blue house, watching all of it. At the kitchen table, Ortiz put on thin gloves and asked me to walk her through the box contents in the order I found them. I did. Checks, ledger, property documents, unsigned statement, Raymond's latch card, the duplicate utility bill, the attic inventory note. Every item laid out under the east window light where Eleanor had once straightened napkins and calculated roasting times. Evan stood by the sink, not sitting. I think he believed sitting would make him look handled. He still reached for dignity in presentation. Some habits survive, even collapse. Claire remained by the sideboard, arms folded. It took an hour, maybe a little more. Enough time for the rain to stop and the windows to go black and reflective. Enough time for the coffee to grow bitter on the burner because no one remembered to turn it off. Enough time for me to hear my wife's kitchen spoken into evidence without her in it. Ortiz photographed. Not everything, just what mattered. She copied down dates and account references. She asked 2 or 3 questions only I could answer, and one Claire could. She asked Evan whether he wished to clarify his presence in the house the previous evening and again tonight. He said very little. Smart, finally, but not smart enough. At one point she lifted the unsigned statement and asked, "Was this your wife's wording?" "Yes." "How certain are you?" "Completely." She nodded and placed it back down with a care I noticed. That mattered more than I expected, not because it changed the law, because it restored Eleanor's tone. Not as paranoia, not as some dying woman's loose fear, as record. Late in the process, Claire said something I don't think any of us were ready for. She wasn't hiding from Dad, she said. She was preserving something for when he could bear to look. No one answered immediately. Even Evan did not. Maybe because there was no good way to call that unfair. That was the late wife restoration beat the story needed. Not sainthood, not tears. The clean return of her purpose. She had not made a secret shrine. She had built a bridge across my weakness and trusted order to hold until I could walk it. By the time Ortiz finished, she told Evan plainly that further contact about the documents would go through counsel if he had any sense at all. She did not arrest him. This was not that kind of story, and I'm glad of it. Handcuffs would have made the night too easy. Reality is slower, quieter, and more humiliating. The justice landed in stages. First, the documents were secured. Ortiz took photographed copies and left the originals with me. Only after Claire signed as witness and a sealed evidence transfer envelope was prepared for morning pickup. The box itself stayed in the house. That was important to me, and after one look around the kitchen, Ortiz understood why. Second, Evan lost the room. Not metaphorically, literally. Every time he spoke after that, he was answering the house, the papers, the witness, the dates. He never again got to be the son explaining my confusion. Third, the duplicate utility authorization was frozen before midnight because Claire called Buckley while Ortiz was still there, and some tired supervisor with more patience than anyone deserved flagged the account after hearing the words unauthorized duplicate mailing and active inquiry. Paper access gone. Quietly, efficiently. That satisfied something in me more than rage would have. Fourth, and deepest, the old story broke. He was not careless. He was not merely overextended. He was not a man who stumbled into selfishness and then talked it smaller. He was a man who had learned my habits of mercy as if they were part of the floor plan. When Ortiz finally stood to go, she looked at me and said, "Mr. Mercer, leave the attic as is tonight if you can. Morning light is better for final inventory." I nodded. At the front door she paused and added, not unkindly, "You did the right thing by staying in the room." After she left, the house went very quiet. Evan was still there. That more than the evidence work was the emotional reckoning I had dreaded without admitting it. Justice can bring witnesses and procedure and structure. But eventually the law goes home and leaves father and son standing in a kitchen that no court can fully sort. Claire started to speak. I shook my head once. "Give us a minute." She looked from me to Evan and understood the request for what it was, and what it was not. Not reconciliation, not privacy as protection, a final plainness. She stepped into the den but did not go far. I could feel her listening with the same stillness Eleanor used to keep for storms. Evan remained by the sink. I stood at the table with my hand resting lightly on the cedar box. Between us sat 42 years of household life translated into proof. He did not look at me when he spoke. You really couldn't keep this inside the family. There it was, the last appeal to the old altar. "No," I said. He laughed without sound and nodded once to himself. "I needed help. You had help. You had the house. You had her. Claire always had the right kind of usefulness. I was the one who had to build something. You built it on her illness. That reached him. I saw it. Not as remorse, as injury at having the sentence fit. He turned then and faced me fully. She never believed in me. That's not true. It is. No. She believed in you enough to keep giving you chances. What she stopped believing in was the story you told every time a chance became someone else's cost. His face moved through 3 expressions and kept none. Finally, it landed on something plain and tired and younger than he was. I did pay some of it back, he said. I believed him. That was the heartbreak of it. Not total evil, not some clean villainy that would have made fatherhood simpler to amputate. Partial repayments, half-intentions, rationalizations, the ordinary selfishness that keeps just enough account of itself to call itself decent. I know, I said. Your mother kept that down too. That wounded him more than accusation had, because it proved the ledger was fair. He looked at the box, then around the kitchen, then up toward the ceiling where the attic sat above us like a second verdict. I used to think this house made everybody weak, he said. I thought about that. No, I said. This house made everybody visible. He flinched. That was the emotional wound deeper than fact. Not that he had been caught. That the house he had read as sentimental clutter had in the end told on him more honestly than any person did. He picked up his jacket from the front chair where he had draped it hours earlier and stood with it in his hand. I'll get a lawyer, he said. You should. He nodded once. At the door, he stopped without turning. Then he asked in a voice I had not heard from him since he was maybe 12. Did she hate me at the end? That question nearly undid me, because it was the child in him at last, arriving far too late and in the wrong room. I answered him carefully. No. He stood very still. She saw you clearly, I said. That isn't the same thing. He did not thank me, did not say good night. He left through the front door and closed it behind him with more care than he had shown anything in the house for years. After that, Claire came back into the kitchen. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then she touched the side of the cedar box and said, "We should put it back. Not hide it, not lock it away elsewhere. Put it back." We carried it upstairs together, one hand each, because the weight was awkward and because something in me wanted witness for the return. The landing lamp cast a warm, shallow pool over Lucy's watercolor. Halfway up, Claire stopped and straightened the frame again where it had drifted crooked. At the linen corridor, I set the box down on the bench and looked at the shelves. The towels were still turned wrong. The quilt still folded backward. The small violence of that almost hurt more after everything else. Claire reached to fix them. "Leave it," I said. She looked at me. "Until morning," I added. "I want to remember exactly how it looked." She nodded. Then, before going down, she touched the little landing table where Eleanor used to set holiday ribbon and said the thing I think both of us had known for hours. She built this so you could still find her when it mattered. When Claire went downstairs, I stayed. I took the box into the attic alone. The room no longer felt like a place I had trespassed into. It felt used, yes, wounded, altered, but honest. The best word for it was honest. I sat under the eaves with the cedar box in my lap and opened it once more, not to read every page again, but to restore it properly. I straightened the bundles in the order Eleanor had intended. Checks first, ledger second, property papers third, statement on top of the blue ribbon packet. Inventory card laid flat beneath the lid. Raymond's card and the utility duplicate set in an envelope of their own. Not because the law required neatness, because she did. Then I retied the ribbon correctly. That small act broke me more cleanly than the confrontation had. My fingers remembered the kind of knot she favored, firm enough to hold, easy enough to reopen, no waste. I tied it the way she did because after 42 years of shared drawers and taped packages and Christmas storage, my hands still knew her better than my pride ever had. When the box was put right, I slid it back beneath the eaves beside the Christmas linens and spare runners and old-school papers, exactly where C4 belonged. I did not push it deeper than before. I did not hide it harder. That mattered. Then I sat on the attic floor and stayed there while the house settled around me into its new arrangement. Below, I could hear Claire moving softly in the kitchen, running water, cupboards, the ordinary mercy of another person choosing not to speak yet. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The gutters clicked once and went still. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked and was answered by another farther away. The attic light made a small yellow world around the bins and rafters. Dust shone in it. One of Eleanor's label cards hung from the Christmas linen bin by a bent paperclip. Her handwriting looked as alive as anything in the room. For the first time since she died, I did not feel the urge to hurry back downstairs. That was the house-rooted reclamation. Not dramatic, not the sort of thing anybody outside a marriage would mark as victory. But it was. I remained in the hardest room and did not need to flee it for the air below. Something had been reclaimed. Not innocence, not trust, certainly not the son I thought I had raised toward steadiness. That stayed lost, maybe forever. What came back was smaller and truer. My place in the house. Not as caretaker of a shrine, not as widower living around sealed weather, as the man still responsible for what the house meant. After a while, I heard Claire on the stairs. She did not come all the way up, just to the landing. "You all right?" she called softly. I looked toward the opening. "No." She waited. Then I said, "But I'm here." That seemed enough for her. It was enough for me. She went back down. I stayed until the last of the evening thinned into night, and the attic light began to feel less like interrogation and more like company. Then I reached over, clicked it off, and sat one moment longer in the dark. The house was still full of what I had lost. That would not change. Eleanor would not come down the hall with the yellow pencil behind her ear. Evan would not become innocent because truth had finally cornered him. The linen shelf would not teach itself back into untouched order. But when I stood and made my way toward the attic ladder, I understood something I had not known the night the nurse leaned across that hospital desk and whispered that there was no child there under that name. Untouched is not the same as safe. And a house does not become shelter again when nothing in it hurts. It becomes shelter when nothing in it has to lie. I climbed down carefully, one hand on the rail, and paused at the landing. Lucy's watercolor house in its cheap white frame was still crooked by a hair. I straightened it with one fingertip. Then I went into the linen corridor and turned the guest towels back the way Eleanor had always left them, embroidered, edge facing outward, and refolded the green quilt with the seam tucked under where it belonged. Only after that did I go back up the short hall, lift the cedar box one final inch to settle it flat beneath the eaves, and sit beside it in the darkening attic while the evening light from the vent slats thinned to almost nothing. That is the image I kept. Not the hospital, not the accusation, not even my son's face when he saw me already in the room. Just the cedar box back in its place among Eleanor's Christmas linens. The knot tied right. The shelves breathing as she intended, and me sitting beside all of it in the last light, aching and emptied, and for the first time in 2 years, fully inside my own house again.